Look, football loves a wonder kid. That is putting it mildly. Football is obsessed with wonder kids. The moment a 16-year-old completes a nutmeg against a senior defender in a cup game, the football world collectively loses its shit. Suddenly, there are YouTube compilations with dramatic music. Fans are calling him the next Messi or the next Ronaldo. Or somehow, in football's endless imagination, the next player who will somehow be better than both. And to be fair, sometimes the hype is sort of justified. Every so often, football produces a teenager who looks genuinely absurd. Think about Lamine Yamal, a player so talented that he seems to exist outside normal development. The kind of footballer who can step into a senior match and make grown professionals look uncomfortable. That excitement is part of what makes football magical. Seeing a kid step onto the biggest stage and immediately look like he belongs there never gets old. Yet, hidden underneath football's obsession with teenage stars is an uncomfortable question that the game rarely wants to ask. What if starting too early comes at a cost? Because if you look closely, a strange pattern does begin to appear. Now, many professional footballers, they do start first team football incredibly young. You know, like 16, 17, 18 years old. It often seems to decline much earlier than expected. Sometimes it is injuries, sometimes it is burnout, sometimes, and perhaps most cruelly of all, their legs just simply go. The sharpness disappears, the burst is gone, the body stops responding the same way it once did. And then football does what football always does. 1 minute, a player is a generational talent. The next, people are asking whether he's finished. This is the problem with Wonderkids. The thing football fans rarely talk about is mileage. Like, age in football is really weird. A 30-year-old footballer is not always the same as another 30-year-old footballer. Thinking of it like a car is the best way to put it. Like, would you rather buy a 5-year-old car with 30,000 miles on it, or a 5-year-old car with like 180,000? Exactly. Footballers are human beings, obviously, not machines. But physically speaking, mileage matters. Sprint after sprint, thousands of training sessions, tackles, heavy landings, long seasons, international football, summer tournaments, relentless travel. Eventually, all of what I've just named catches up to them. And that's the issue at Wonderkid. Like, it's simple, they start accumulating their mileage far earlier than players that could be the same age as them. While some footballers are still playing academy football at 18, others are already playing 50 senior matches a season. By the time they reach what should be their physical prime, they're already carrying 10 or 15 years of elite football in their bodies. And once you start looking at football through that lens, a lot of careers suddenly begin to make a bit more sense. Like, let's take Wayne Rooney for example, because Rooney might be one of the clearest examples of football completely misunderstanding physical decline. Rooney exploded into English football at 16 years old. That's 3 years younger than me. He wasn't eased in, he wasn't protected, not carefully managed. He was thrown straight into the Premier League and somehow looked like he belonged immediately. And what made Rooney so special was not just the talent, it was the aggression, the intensity, the fearlessness. He played football like every game was personal, charging into tackles, bullying defenders, playing with a level of intensity that made him feel older than he actually was. Then came Manchester United, then came England, then Champions League football, international tournaments, massive expectations, massive pressure, all on. The football world expected Rooney to carry England before he was old enough to legally have a drink in a pub. And yet by his late 20s, people had already started saying something really strange. Rooney's legs are gone. Suddenly, that explosiveness that he had at such a young age was fading. He looked heavier, less sharp, less electric. The same player who once looked unstoppable seemed to be physically slowing down. And this is where football fans made a mistake, because Rooney's decline became attached to one impossible comparison, even now when he's retired. But it's Cristiano Ronaldo. It was the same era, same Manchester United team, same age bracket. For years, football fans compared the two physically, but the comparison never really made sense, because not everyone's Cristiano Ronaldo. And Ronaldo, if we're putting it lightly, is a freak, but an athletic freak. The diet, the recovery, the discipline, the genetics, the obsessive professionalism. The man practically treats his body like a billion-pound science experiment. Most footballers simply aren't built like that, and they don't have that mentality. And not to mention, most humans are just not built like that in general. So when Rooney physically declined earlier than Ronaldo, people treated it like a failure, but perhaps it was simply reality. Rooney had already packed nearly 15 years of elite football into his body by the time others were just sort of entering their peak. And once you start thinking like that, another career suddenly feels less confusing. Now, another one is Fernando Torres. Liverpool Torres was terrifying, not good, terrifying, quick, elegant, powerful, clinical, the kind of striker defenders genuinely dreaded facing. He could beat defenders for pace, muscle through challenges, finish from impossible angles. At his best, Torres looked unstoppable, and then suddenly, he didn't. The injuries arrived, especially the knee problems, and little by little, the explosiveness just went. Now, football is brutally unforgiving to explosive players. If a technical midfielder loses 5% physically, he can sometimes, survive. But if a striker whose game depends on acceleration loses 5%, the difference is just enormous. That half yard disappears, the burst vanishes, the timing changes, suddenly chances stop becoming goals. And football fans can be incredibly cruel. He's washed, he's forgot how to play football, all this shite, yada yada yada. But Torres had also been playing senior football since he was a teenager at Atletico Madrid. Another player carrying expectations incredibly early. Captain of Atletico Madrid at 18? Another footballer with years of hidden mileage before he was even supposed to be peaking. And once again, football mostly ignored that context, because football rarely thinks about wear and tear until the decline becomes impossible to ignore. Now, this brings us to perhaps the most ultimate experience of all, and that is Neymar, because Neymar is the perfect example of a wonder kid who burned bright, dazzled the world, and perhaps paid a price for starting too early. There was a period where Neymar genuinely looked destined to rule football, not compete, rule. He was ridiculous at Santos. He was humiliating defenders before most players had even finished school. By 17, he was already playing senior football, and this is where the South American side of the story becomes quite interesting, because this pattern feels especially common in South American football. Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, Colombia. In South America, if a kid is talented enough, he plays. Immediately. No waiting around, no careful long-term planning, no sitting on the bench until, maybe 20, 21. At 16 or 17, many elite prospects are already competing against grown men, partly because the culture embraces you, partly because clubs desperately need financial stability. A superstar teenager can transform a club financially, so if someone looks special enough, the temptation is obvious. Play him, sell him, cash in. And Neymar, you know what, he is the perfect example of this. By the time he arrived in Barcelona, he already had years of senior football in his legs. Then came the chaos of elite European football. Champions League football even, international football with Brazil, commercial obligations, summer tournaments like the World Cup, and perhaps most importantly, he got kicked to bits because defenders realised something very quickly. You could not stop Neymar technically, so many just simply fouled him. It was the easiest thing to do, repeat it over and over again. Ankle injuries, metatarsal problems, ligament issues, muscle injuries, the body slowly collecting scars. And then more recently came the ACL injury at Al Hilal. And for the first time, football fans genuinely became asking this uncomfortable question, which was Neymar finished? Just think about how strange that sounds. A player who should still theoretically have years left suddenly being spoken about like an aging veteran. But again, football age and real age are not always the same, because physically, Neymar has already spent close to 2 decades absorbing elite level punishment. And if Neymar feels like the biggest example, perhaps this is because we all expect them to be untouchable. The heir to Messi and Ronaldo, one of the most naturally gifted footballers ever, yet even he could not escape the mileage. And maybe that is exactly why the current Raheem Sterling conversation feels familiar, because Sterling's story follows a strangely similar pattern. Burst onto the scene young, play huge amounts of football, depend heavily on explosiveness, then eventually, people begin asking difficult questions. Sterling debuted professionally at 17, and since then his career has involved relentless football. Liverpool, Man City, Chelsea, Arsenal, Feyenoord now, England, Champions League football, international tournaments, constant pressing systems, constant sprinting, and Sterling's game has always depended heavily on sharp movement and acceleration. Those quick bursts, that explosiveness, the ability to glide past defenders. But football changes quickly. I don't know, at City he was really good, but since his Chelsea years, there's been a growing conversation around whether Sterling has physically started to lose something. And now, at Feyenoord, the noise has only become louder. The Dutch media are quite to the point, but the scrutiny, and there was questions about performance, questions about sharpness, questions about whether the old Sterling still exists. This pressure from them became really loud, and loud enough that Robin van Persie, his manager at Feyenoord, had to publicly speak out about him, trying to ease the noise and get journalists off his back. Now this is not to say that Sterling is finished. He's far from it. He is still a very good footballer, but does raise that uncomfortable question once again. What happens when a player whose entire game depends on speed starts losing speed? Because maybe, just maybe, we are once again seeing the cost of early mileage. And the uncomfortable truth is that football keeps repeating this cycle because, football, it is £1 billion business. Not even, it could be £1 trillion. Everyone wants the next superstar immediately. Fans want highlights, clubs want results, sponsors want stars, and social media wants clips. Nobody wants just patience. Like a teenager plays 3 good games and suddenly there's pressure for him to start every match. More football, more expectations, more pressure, more responsibility. But footballers are still human beings, especially young footballers. And this is where modern football, and me personally, I think it needs to be incredibly careful. Because players like, let's take the biggest example right now, Lamine Yamal. They're genuinely ridiculous talents. Watching him play feels unfair. Just his confidence, his ability to play, technically, his intelligence even. At times, he just genuinely looks like one of the brightest players of his generation. But that is exactly why football needs to protect him. Because the temptation is really, really obvious. And that is just play him every game, every tournament, every important moment. Because quite frankly, he is talented enough. But just because a player can play every minute does not mean he should. The same goes for young players that are being benched a little bit. Like, let's say, Max Diamond at Arsenal. He's an incredible talent, he's got huge potential. But football history keeps screaming the same warning. Wonderkids are not invincible. Their bodies are still developing, their muscles, their joints, their recovery. They are still kids, gifted kids, but still kids. And maybe football needs to stop acting shocked when a player who has been sprinting through elite football since age 16 suddenly begins declining at maybe age 29. Because maybe in football years, he is not really 29. Maybe he's 37, maybe he's 40. Maybe the hidden mileage has already taken everything. And that is the uncomfortable truth about footballs, your obsession with Wonderkids. We love them, we celebrate them, we do kinda overhype them. And sometimes, without even realising it, we burn straight through them. Now obviously, because football's been around for years, it will always produce young stars. And honestly, that's part of what makes the sport really beautiful. There is nothing quite like seeing a teenager step onto a football pitch and embarrass these professionals. And then you realise that he's 2 years younger than you. Well, for me anyway, it's weird. That feeling just never gets old. But maybe football needs to learn patience, because talent is precious. And if we are not careful, the next Neymar, the next Rooney, the next Sterling may not fade because they were not good enough. But they might fade because football simply asks too much, too soon. And in a sport worth billions of pounds, maybe the least we can do is remember something very simple. These footballers are still people, young people, not machines, not content, not transfer assets, just people. And if football truly wants its Wonderkids to become legends, then maybe the best thing to do and the smartest thing the game can do is stop treating them like they're indestructible. Anyways, that's my rant over. Thanks all so much for watching. Goodbye.